Because I'm Kira.
That's right! I win!
I can't laugh yet. I've got to hold it in. They're all gonna die.
Light Yagami often gets a bad rap. I know it's easy to dislike him as he's certainly a bit deranged, and I'm painfully aware that I'm in the minority of people who have, from day one, always supported him regardless of his actions. And that's because, overall, I actually think Light's a pretty good guy. Now, before you call the cops on me, allow me to explain why I think that people tend to inadequately judge Light as an immoral person, and why I believe Light Yagami is both a good guy and very likely to be the best possible person that found the Death Note. I know it's very unlikely that this video will change anyone's mind on Light, but there's a depressingly shallow amount of pro-Light content out there, so I figured I should do my part and expand that library just a bit. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Many people label Light from Death Note as evil or a monster without fully understanding his character. The reason for this, I believe, is that we don't really spend much time with Light in the show. Let me clarify. In terms of narrative structure, Kira and Light are essentially two different characters. Though it's a bit more complicated than that. Basically, Light is Light without the Death Note's power or knowledge, and Kira is Light with that power. The reason so many people fail to understand Light as a character is because he's barely in the series. Light kills his first person with the Death Note around 6 minutes into the first episode, and then has more or less already transitioned into the being we know as Kira by the end of that episode. However, to say that we never get to interact with the real Light is incorrect. We just don't get introduced to him until around episode 18 when the Yotsuba arc begins. I know a lot of people feel that this specific arc is too slow, but personally, it's this arc in particular that really brings Death Note together for me due to the introduction of a character that I like to call Yotsuba Light. Now, I could do an entire video on why Yotsuba Light is so interesting, and if this video does well, maybe I will, don't forget to like. But essentially, all you need to know about Yotsuba Light is that he's a genuinely good person. You can see this in all of his actions, but to give a specific example, look at how he explicitly refuses to put Misa in harm's way or even take advantage of her feelings to advance the case. This is a stark distinction from the entity known as Kira and a perfect representation, to me at least, of who Light is at his core when unaffected by the immense fear and stress known only to those who possess the Death Note. The Yotsuba arc is great because it makes you wonder how these two characters with distinctly different personalities and moral codes could really be the same person. Some may argue that this shows just how powerful the corrective powers of the Death Note are, but I think the opposite is true. Kira, as you know him, can only become the godlike being worshipped by many because of how moral and genuinely concerned about humanity he really is. This is perfectly captured in what we see in his actions, revolving around how and why he uses the Death Note. I think it's extremely telling of Light's personality that his first uses of the Death Note are to help people. The first use is to stop a hostage situation, and the second is to stop a sexual assault. Even before the second murder, he considered offing his classmate Saro because he was bullying one of his classmates. This clearly points to an innate desire to help others, or at the very least, a genuine hatred for people who cause trouble for others. But what cements Light's virtue in this first episode is the genuine selflessness of his actions. I know selflessness may not be on the top of the list of qualities anti-Kira would use to describe Light, but let's stop and think about this quote from Light directly after his second kill.
誰かがやらなくてはいけないんだ。自らの精神や命を犠牲にしてでも、このままじゃいけないんだ。もし他の誰かがこのノートを拾ったとして、この世に不必要な人間を消すことのできる奴がいるか、いるわけがない。でも僕にならできる。
So, there are two things evident here. One, Light doesn't relish murdering people. The murder isn't the goal at all, in fact. It's simply a means to an end, to guide society to where, in Light's opinion, it needs to be. More important, however, is the theme of sacrifice here, right? He states he's willing to sacrifice his mind and soul for the development of humanity, which a lot of people just kind of dismiss as your typical sociopath speak. But this is the part where I feel like everyone just kind of glosses over. Light expected to die as a result of his actions in the first episode. We see this in the scene where Light and Ryuk first meet. 5 days have passed since Light initially found the Death Note, and we see that he's been writing in it furiously, but it's his reaction here that really shows us how selfless he is. We can see in this interaction that Light was very much expecting Ryuk to collect his soul and kill him. In fact, when Ryuk tells him that he's not going to do anything to him, at least not immediately, there's genuine shock on Light's face. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us 1, that when he said he was willing to sacrifice his soul for the benefit of the world, he meant that literally. There's no denying that. And 2, he was aware, or at least under the impression, that he had very limited time with the Death Note. However, with that time, not once did he use it for any personal gain. There's something else I also want to touch on in this interaction. Light is also very aware he has a unique psychological disposition and emotional resolve to better the world with this power, as he states in his Birth Akira speech. So when Ryuk says that if Light doesn't want the notebook, he just give it to someone else, I believe Light internalized and understood this to mean that if anybody else got this power, they would almost definitely abuse it for personal gain. So returning to Ryuk wasn't a real object. We see this proven repeatedly throughout the series as Misa, Higuchi, Mello, and even Akira all use the Death Note for personal gain and not for the benefit of society. In short, Light's approach to the notebook is almost entirely rooted in selfless behavior. Light doesn't so much become Kira out of desire, but because it was thrust upon him. Fortunately, he valued society much more than he did his own personal destiny, and didn't just use the Death Note to become a millionaire or celebrity. In light of this though, no pun intended, the question then becomes, how could a person who is so concerned about morality and making the world a better place so easily kill so many innocent people? That's a very good question, so let's address that next. To better understand the duality of Kira and Light Yagami, it's essential to examine their moral and philosophical codes. But please understand, I am not a philosopher, so bear with me as I delve into these entry-level concepts. Death Note pivots around 2 moral frameworks, deontology and consequential utilitarianism. Deontology emphasizes the inherent rightness or wrongness of actions, regardless of their outcomes. For instance, it would argue something like lying is always wrong, even if it's to help a friend. In fiction, you see this moral framework represented a lot in goody two-shoe type characters like Captain America or Aang for Avatar: The Last Airbender. Consequential utilitarianism, contrastingly, judges actions based on their results and aims for the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. Characters embodying this include Itachi Uchiha and, to a certain extent, Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan. Light's transformation into Kira marks a significant shift in his moral compass. Initially, Yotsuba Light aligns with deontological ethics, adhering to traditional moral values. However, as Kira, he leans towards a utilitarian approach, akin to Itachi's philosophy, justifying his actions by their outcomes. This often leads to discussions about the corrupting nature of power, but I believe that's a shallow conclusion, and it's more about with great power comes great responsibility. Which brings us to another one of my favorite characters, Spider-Man. Spider-Man and Light share some similarities. In particular, they have the whole secret identity vigilante thing going on. And vigilantism, as criticized by our good friend J. Jonah Jameson, is generally deemed as wrong. Sure, it's not the same as killing people, usually, but the question still remains, what exactly gives Peter the right to go around webbing up bad guys without due process and trespassing to his heart's content? The answer to that is nothing, because Spider-Man has no legitimate legal authority, which means Jonah is correct in his assessment of Spidey being a criminal. Under a purely deontological view, Spider-Man's actions could be seen as immoral. However, he justifies them using a moral framework similar to Kira's, best illustrated by this quote in Civil War.
Look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
Now, this dilemma doubly applies to Light, who must decide whether to act for the greater good despite moral ambiguity. Remember, he believes his time with the Death Note is limited. If he doesn't use it, Ryuk is given it to someone else who will likely not use it for the common good. Hence, he needs to maximize the utilitarian good in the very short amount of time that he has. People often disparage Light for all the lives he took, but very few discuss the lives he saved. By the end of his reign, Light had reduced crime by 70%. That's 70% less thefts, 70% less drug cartels, 70% less Jeffrey Epsteins. And that's not even the impressive statistic here. He also ended all wars. Can you imagine what a world with no war and no threat of war would look like? From a utilitarian perspective, these achievements are significant, saving quite literally millions of lives. This dramatic reduction of violence and conflict provides a glimpse of the future Kira envisioned. So when Light kills Ray Pember and Amy Misora, it's not because he necessarily wants to, because if he doesn't, he'll be responsible for the resulting wars, deaths, and tragedies that come about as a result of his defeat. In Light's utilitarian view of morality, he sees Naomi and Ray not as innocent, but as forces of evil that need to be eliminated. It's very much worth noting, however, that despite the callousness in which he's able to murder those who many consider to be innocent, Light's approach to society is not one of malice or really even of tyranny. Anime specifically clarifies that Light exercises incredibly nuanced judgment in deciding who lives and dies.
やはり別人だ。僕が監禁される前のキラと今のキラ、明らかに違う。今のキラは殺人を犯し報道された者を片っ端から裁いているが、前のキラは殺意のなかった者、誤って人を殺してしまった者、情状酌量の余地のある者に対しては極力裁きを下していない。
That is, he researches each case before he kills someone, and spares people who regret their actions or had nuanced reasons for committing said crime. In truth, the only instances of him targeting innocents or petty criminals are in instances in which he needs to defend himself against L, which, again, from a utilitarian perspective, will be justified as it was for the greater good. As the cherry on top, it's also worth noting that, despite these achievements, Light is aware of the moral ambiguity of his actions. His journey in Death Note is a complex interplay of these deontological and utilitarian ethics. Ultimately, his moral framework is continually challenged and shaped by the immense power at his disposal. Light himself states this specifically in episode 30. He knows that his actions are wrong when examined under the lens of the average person, but I don't think examining his actions under that scope provides the accurate nuance necessary for examining Light's morality.
分かっているんだ。自分がやっていることが悪だということ。しかし、自分が犠牲になってでも世の中を変える。それがキラの選んだ正義。キラの考えはそんなとこだろう。キラが悪か正義かなんて僕たちが考えることじゃない。僕たちはキラを捕まえるしかないんだ。キラを捕まえればキラは悪。キラが世界を支配すればキラは。
To sum this all up, the character of Light and his transformation to Kira presents a deeply complex moral quandary. Light's journey from a deontological to a utilitarian ethical stance is not merely a descent into moral corruption. Instead, it's a nuanced response to the extraordinary power that he wields. His actions, though extreme, stem from a genuine desire to reform a world he perceives as corrupt and unjust. Some, like L, would say Light has a childish sense of right and wrong, but I would argue the opposite. Light's actions in Death Note are a compelling exploration of the gray areas of morality and ethics. It raises critical questions about the nature of justice, the subjectivity of morality, and the implications of wielding power. I really believe the duality of Light and Kira forces us to reflect on our own values and the lengths we might go personally to do what we believe is right. For example, what would you do in episode 1 if you were in Light's shoes? Would you stop the sexual assault or would you just let it happen, you know? Light's actions, while, definitely controversial, opens a dialogue on the complexities of justice and the sacrifices one might feel compelled to make for the greater good. Which begs the question, if given the opportunity, would you use the Death Note? And if so, how? Let me know in the comments. Alright, thanks for watching this video. Let me know what you think. Till next time, don't forget to like. Bye-bye.